Do want to take you out to this live image that we have right here. This is over at the Vatican, and that right there is the chimney that we're going to be watching over the next several days, because we are just days away from the start of the papal conclave as the cardinals gather to elect the next leader of the Catholic Church. Now, the first vote set for Wednesday with a 2/3 majority needed. Only cardinals under the age of 80 are eligible to vote in the conclave as electors come together in Vatican City, typically there in the Sistine Chapel. The cardinals are cut off from the outside world. We're talking no access to phones, internet, or media of any kind. If there's no agreement, there are up to 4 votes allowed per day, with 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. Each cardinal writes a name on a ballot, which is then folded and placed in a chalice on the altar. After each round, ballots are burned in a special stove with smoke coming from that chimney right there. As you may know, black smoke means the decision has not been made, and white smoke signifies the election of a new pope. A lot to discuss here as we discuss kind of the history of this and what we can expect. So I do want to bring in Joelle Rollo-Koster, a medieval historian and papacy expert at the University of Rhode Island. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And first off, the question I kind of want to ask you is kind of the historical aspect here of the papal conclave, how it began and how it's kind of progressed over the centuries since it started.
You are asking me to give you the history of the church, which is going to take a long time, so I'm going to try to make it short. Basically, we need to work backward. What we have today is a papacy, which is essentially spiritual and moral. But for the longest time of its history, the papacy was also a political power. And that political power was more or less contested, and that political power was also more or less manipulated. I'm just trying to give you big sweep of history. And there was a need, basically, to control, for the papacy to control that power and to regain it for itself. So we also need to remember that for the longest time in history, the church is a territorial power. And because the church held the papal states, that gave it the possibility also to be a political power. So if we look at the history of the papal election, we have basically until the 11th century, so from the beginning of the papacy to the 11th century, we have some type of messy situation when there is an idea of consensus, consensus obtained through negotiations, but negotiations usually means that the big political power of the time, so it could be the Byzantine emperor, it could be an Ostrogothic king, it could be Justinian in the East, it could be the Holy Roman Emperor, they made the Pope. And then from the 11th century on, the papacy said, we are going to force secular power to accept the fact that we need to deal with our own destiny, and we will actually take care of our own election. So basically, historically, I can give you like 3 dates. 1059, we have a first pope, Nicholas II, who says, not everybody can vote for a pope, but only specific cardinals, the cardinals bishops and the cardinals deacons. That does not work. And then eventually we will have a group of cardinals, all cardinals, 2/3 of a vote. And that's basically eventually what's established in 1274. And if I may add, it has not changed that much from 1274.
And I'm not a history buff, but I think that was a perfect explanation there because even I could understand it. So I do want to ask you about the secrecy of all of this, because a lot of this is done in secrecy. We don't have cameras inside the Vatican. We can't watch as all of this plays out. Can you tell me about the significance of the secrecy and how maybe it has changed over the centuries?
So the need for secrecy grew from the need for taking charge of electing the Pope. So the Church was always in need of controlling that papal election. It could not control that papal elections for century. And then when it started to control it, which means with the first idea of a conclave, it decided that the only way it could control it if there were absolutely no external interference. So the secrecy is linked to the fact that we want that group of cardinal. And at the beginning, we only have like 20, 25 cardinals, so it's not a large group. But we do not want them to have any contact whatsoever, because contact means pressure coming from the outside, pressure coming from the political powers. And I bet you still today, there are still a lot of pressures. And we are trying to keep those pressure away by keeping these cardinals absolutely isolated.
I want to pop up this live image that we do have over the Vatican here. We have so many different cameras in that area. What are the qualifications here that are required to become Pope? I have to imagine there are quite a few of them. And how do they maybe influence the decisions that are made during that conclave?
So, as you're showing St. Peter, the Pope is in fact the Bishop of Rome. So traditionally, you can say that any baptized male over 35 years old, educated in theology, is actually eligible. But what we need to have is that we need to have a man, since it's only men, to be eligible to become a bishop, which means that he's going to be maybe not ordained, but he needs to have the capacity to be ordained. So any man educated over 35, Catholic, baptized, can make it. And that person needs, that man needs to have the capacity to be consecrated or ordained a bishop. Very, very few non-ordained non-ordained ecclesiastics are actually found in the college.
One thing I want to talk to you about is an interesting kind of aspect to all of this, because we always talk about the election of the Pope, one Pope, but there was, I believe, a time in history when there was actually more than one Pope, possibly three of them. Can you explain all of that for folks watching?
Okay, again, a long story, which I'm going to try to make short. Number one, there is a long history, again, of contested elections. So throughout time, specifically throughout the Middle Ages, we have very often a Holy Roman Emperor electing, naming a Pope, and then other people in Rome electing another Pope. So here we have, a double election. But the biggest issue is going to be born in the 1370s, when there is an election in Rome right after the papacy came back from the city of Avignon in France. And there is an election with a lot of violence. Violence coming from the crowd attending outside, waiting outside of the conclave. But the election took place anyway. That election is going to elect a Pope, Urban VI, who is, let's call him a nice guy for the cardinals for the first couple of months, and then decided that he wants to reform the cardinals. So the cardinals don't like that, and they are going to use the pretext of the violence, which, by the way, is traditional, and say, well, we made a mistake. We need to elect somebody else. And for something like 2 generations, we're going to have 2 popes, and they are going to try to negotiate. And at one time, there is even 3 popes until we finally go back to 1 pope in 1417. But yes, it happens, but it has not happened since 1417. With the exception of a retired pope and a living pope, but that's a different story.
And all eyes are going to be here on the conclave as it does get underway on Wednesday. The first vote expected around 10 a.m. Eastern time. Of course, that is a little bit later on in the day there over in Vatican City. Joelle, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and help describe a little bit more about the history here. Anything else you want to add? Anything I left out before I let you go?
No, that it's fascinating that to see so much interest into the papacy, and again, it has the entire system has a long, long history which has changed very little.
All right, thank you again for taking the time to be here with us.
Bye bye.